Apple, the company, has announced that John Ternus will be the company's next chief executive. Tim Cook stepping down. Mr. Ternus is currently the SVP of hardware engineering. Now, my gut says that that's a very tedious sounding title that carries an enormous amount of power. Tim Cook, who will be stepping down as CEO, will become Apple's executive chairman. The transition will take place on September the 1st. Brian Stelter is with me. I have to, I mean, regardless, Brian, of the end of an era nature, which we can get into at some point, the smoothness, the elegance by which this has been done, compared to, say, the Disney Bob Iger shambles, or the, just or even our own companies had a few shambles in our times. But this is grande elegante.
Right, Apple wants to get this right. It's one of the most important moves in the company's, look, so far this century, right? Yeah, Tim Cook very seamlessly took over for Steve Jobs. Now you have John Ternus taking over. And if you looked at the press in recent months, the trade press about Apple, Ternus's name was being signaled. He was in line. It was clear that he was likely to be tapped. We didn't know it was going to come today, but we knew this might happen at some point soon. And it comes, as you know, Richard, at a time when there's been an investor narrative, a media narrative, fairly or unfairly, about Apple falling behind in AI, leaning too heavily on those incredible iPhone sales year after year. Bloomberg recently quoted sources saying John Ternus knows he needs bolder products and a strong approach to AI. So today, Cook in a statement calling him a brilliant engineer and thinker, someone focused on every possible way we can make things better, bolder, more meaningful, and more beautiful. He's the perfect person for the job. So far, though, Apple stock down just a little bit in after-hours trading. Maybe that just signifies people expected some new CEO relatively soon, and they expected John Ternus for the job, but that's the news so far, Richard.
Brian, I'm grateful. Brian Stelter, our chief media. There, Lance Ulanoff's with me, editor-at-large at Tech Radar. Look, Lance, you know this whole thing has gone full circle. I remember, of course, when Tim took over, it was Steve Jobs passed.
Yes.
And we had those first 2 or 3 years. Was Tim up to the job? He didn't have a polo sweater. He didn't look like that. He wasn't as cool. Was he up to the job? And again and again and again, that was the question that was, well, clearly he was. I mean, it took it to the most valuable company in the world. And now we're asking the same questions. Plus ça change, les mêmes choses, as they say.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Ternus is certainly up for the job. We've been talking about John Ternus taking over for, I don't know, the last year. There've been inklings around it. Cook, there were internal, we knew that there were certainly internal talks about the succession plan, but Cook was basically, the outlook was like, I'm sticking around as long as I can do this. He wanted to stick around. He just went through Apple's 50th anniversary where he gave so many interviews, but at the big kickoff at Grand Central, the people who were there was Tim Cook, John Ternus, and the head of global marketing. Those were the 3 heads of state who were there. Cook took the stage briefly, didn't say anything. And at the most recent, biggest product launch they've had in a while, which was the MacBook Neo, there wasn't even Tim Cook in the video. So I think there were all these signs. But as far as Ternus being up for the job, he understands Apple. He's obviously a really hardware guy. Apple's last 5 or 6 years have been all about services, massive business, makes a lot of money. Tim Cook's done the right thing, but it doesn't feel innovative. It doesn't feel exciting. So maybe it's time for a little excitement, hardware excitement under John Ternus.
Does it matter name recognition to the general public? And I mean, well, I'm going to challenge you. You're not moving. You're not budging. You're not budging on this. I'll tell you what I'm asking, because companies rely on cachet. They rely on call in this particular case, and to a certain extent, do you need to have somebody who's known? You're still going to say no.
I'm glad you said that, because you're right. It does rely on cool. But you know what's cool? You know what has the cachet? Apple. That's been the thing. That's the reason why Tim Cook was able to step in 2011 and the company didn't implode, because it had been baked into the company that built the iPod and the iPhone and the iPad. It had that from going back, decades. And I think that it's intrinsic to the company and not necessarily the leadership. And I will say that Tim Cook, over the years, kind of went from, who's Tim Cook, to, oh my gosh, it's Tim Cook. Come here, let me have a selfie.
Exactly. Now, I just wonder, one other thing about this whole business. How would you grade Cook's tenure?
B+ to A. I think that
I'm glad you weren't marking my homework.
Look, from a business standpoint, he has grown this company in ways that I don't even think Steve Jobs could have imagined. But the fastest growing part of the business, as I said before, is services. There have been some, Apple Watch, the focus on health, really, really exciting, innovative, probably one of his signature moves. Vision Pro, AI, I think that's where we see some stumbles, and the AI is really kind of hung around, like is not the most important technological innovation, and Tim Cook hasn't quite solved it for Apple.
Now, Lance, I want to finish just on a more personal note with Cook, of course. He came out in 2014 in an article as gay, and it was, I mean, everybody knew. So it wasn't like, anybody who knew, but it was considered a major moment just because A, he said it, B, he made out how important he was, and then he left it alone and got on with what he was supposed to do, which was run Apple. He didn't sort of wear it on his sleeve on a daily basis. And I think that is something that he advanced the LGBT agenda in the corporate world quite considerably.
Yeah, look, I think it was a really important moment for business, for the tech industry, for leadership. I think I think Tim Cook's sort of casual openness, like you said, people knew, but it wasn't something that people were like, so what? And then he said it because I think he felt that it maybe would help other people. That was fantastic. I think that in recent years, there have been some questions about, where Tim Cook has stood as far as support of diverse communities because of his seeming closeness to the Trump administration. But for the first time, you noticed he answered that question in recent weeks about why he talks to them. And I've always said this to people, if you look at Apple, they've kept their DEI. And I think that's because of Tim Cook, a red line that he's going to continue to have that as part of the company.
And I'll tell you something, it's very easy for everybody else to criticize when you cozy up to the administration or whatever, but you don't have the responsibility of hundreds of thousands of jobs and families and incomes and things like that. Lance, grateful that you're with me tonight. Thank you for coming on so quickly. Just what we needed to hear tonight. Thank you. We'll have more